Hello, Madcappers. My journey into learning how to quilt continues. I have part 2 today of my quilting adventure, and I'm still making placemats. And this time I'm using pre-cut jelly roll strips. And then at the end of this, I'll show you how I cut some strips myself using a theme of fabric. But jelly roll packages are usually curated so they all match. I'll use this fusible on one side interfacing, and it comes in 2 widths. So for placemats, I'm going to use the one that's a little bit narrower in width. That's about 11 and 3/4 of an inch deep, and it comes in a 10-yard roll. I've just fused on the plain piece of fabric on one side that will be the reversible side of my placemats. And now I'm going to show you my little formula for creating a foolproof placemat design. And I'm going to start out by drawing a 45-degree line across one corner of my placemat, and I'm going about 3 inches or 3 1/4 inches deep from each corner point. And I'm just going to start by laying down those strips, and you'll see that there's 10 strips across. I will put a link to a PDF for this in the description below, as well as the lengths of each number from 1 to 10 to help you on your quilting journey. Strip 1 is right side up, strip 2 is right side down, and I'm starting by just matching up the inside raw edge of those 2 pieces on my chalk line. The width of my presser foot is my guide for this first step and for sewing all the strips into place. And you're just going to repeat this all the way from 1 to 10. And that first strip covers the corner on that one side, on our starting side. And number 2 is just sewn on, create that first line of quilting on the other side that you can see. And I can trim the excess away. I will also give it a press just so it's nice and flat when I put number 3 on. I'm just going to do the same thing, but I'm going to check to make sure that both edges are going to clear the size of my placemat. And then once again, now you can put a pin in there as I have. I'm just going to use the width of my presser foot and sew number 3 right sides together onto number 2, and so on down the placemat. And see, what I like about this package of jelly roll is that it came with enough strips in different colorways to make a really interesting, fun placemat. And there's also 3 different patterns in the blue, so I'm going to do a blue one as well. But you can see as I go along, I'm using the green, the red, and the white, and creating a very fun and festive holiday placemat. And you know, this is really foolproof. I've tried this now with a number of different fabrics, and it works every time. It's just a simple 45-degree angle on the placemat, and the matching placemat I will start in the opposite corner so the lines go in the opposite direction, which looks really nice on the table, and I'll show you that at the end as well. Now, you can see on the other side, I've got those gold, I'm using a gold thread underneath, so I've got those gold quilting lines, and now I'm just going to press this all flat. And I'm going to take a minute to trim off all the extra with my Fiskars ruler combo cutter, and just make sure everything is still square. And my sewing machine tends to push a little bit of this out of square, so I'm going to do this a number of times at each step so that when I get to that final step, it's going to be nice and easy to put the edge on. And now all my sides are nice and trim, and I've got my 10 strips on. It's time to decorate this, especially on the other side, because it's going to look really pretty. So I'm going to add some interest by adding some quilting lines of sewing, which is quilting lines for me across in the opposite direction. So right across these strips. And you can see I started with a 45-degree angle at the bottom, about the same as what I started with at the top when I put that first chalk line on as my starting point. And I'm just going to sew right across the placemat on those lines. Now, once these are sewn on into place, these strips are actually 2 inches wide. They started out as 2.5 inches wide, the common size for a jelly roll. And so with a 1/4 inch seam all the way down, I ended up with 2-inch strips. So my lines of decoration now are going to be 2 inches apart. And I'm just going to keep adding those lines as I go, using my clear ruler to use the line that I just made, because I've got nice red thread there so it's easy to see, and just adding 2 inches with the chalk line and following that chalk line right across the width of my placemat. It's really easy to do, folks. Once you've done one, you're just going to be a pro at this. And again, I will add a PDF link that you can download for free from our website that will tell you the length of each one of these 10 strips. And as you can see with the graphic, I had numbered them 1 through 10. Now, if you choose to cut your own strips, just make sure that when you do these decorative lines for your finishing touch, that you space them out as wide as your strips end up being once your strips are sewn. And here I'm using the Tim Holtz collection to cut some of my own strips. So I'm going to practice what I preach, and I'll use that old-fashioned calendar. There's a real old-fashioned flair. You can see like the patterns in the fabric have this old faded Scotch tape built into the pattern on the whole series of this Tim Holtz FreeSpirit collection. And I cut these strips to be 3 inches wide, so that's ended up that they turned out to be 2.5 inches once they were sewn in place, or 7 centimeters. So when I go to do that decorative top stitching to create that diamond pattern on the back, I will actually space my lines out 2.5 inches. I'm getting ahead of myself here, however, but look at this is what you're going to end up with, hopefully, at the end of this lesson. And we're going to go back now to finishing those festive Christmas mats we've started. So we move on to the next step now, which is finishing the edges. There are still raw edges. I'll just cut some strips from the same fabric that I used on the reversing side. You could use pieces of your jelly roll, and you'll need 2 strips to make your edging. We've got 60 inches in total to finish off. So the 2 strips pieced together with a 45-degree angle, and most of our quilting fabric is about 40 to 44 inches wide, so I'm going to have to piece 2 together, but I'll have some left over to add to another strip for that second placemat. I'll just work on one to show you my technique here. And I'm cutting my edges to be 2 3/4 inches wide. I just like having the extra, and I'm just going to go around now and trim those extra threads and a little bit of extra fleece interfacing away. So again, I've got a nice clean edge to work with when I put the binding on. I find the cleaner those edges, the better the placemat lies on your table. And the way that I'm putting on the edge too, it makes a beautiful placemat that just lies perfectly flat, which I'm really pleased with. So this has been an adventure, and I could see you could use this technique to make Christmas stockings with this same interfacing as well. There's all sorts of things. You could make tote bags, all sorts of ways that you can use this technique, or even just use a little panel, which I'm experimenting with as well to maybe add to a future hat lesson. But, I never got into quilting because I was so busy making hats. But now that I'm sort of semi-retired and making these videos and sharing my patterns, I'm finding that I might have missed out on a really lovely little sewing-related hobby. Okay, so I've cut off that grain edge, and I'm going to keep that because that tells me the width of my strip, which I'm going to need when I go over to the sewing machine. And I'm going to draw on a 45-degree inch line there. You can just fold it from edge to corner down to the side edge, and I'm going to go from left to right. So up on the left side is where I start, and I finish off down on the right. I've got a 45-degree angle, and that is going to be my starting point for the edge. So rather than try and fit this in and pull these edges together in this small space, I find it's just so easy to put that 45-degree line in right at the start. And then it's just a matter of cutting the finishing edge to the right size, and I'll show you that. So I'm just making sure that this is really square at the beginning, and I'm just going to make a press. I'm just going to press it. I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to press along the entire length of this edge trim. And my edge is not cut on the bias, it's just cut straight across the grain from one side to the other. So saving this is my little ruler that I'm going to use to finish off the trim. And let's get started. Let's sew the edge on. So if you're an experienced quilter, you will know this way of doing corners. I'm just going to write on some arrows so you can see the direction that I'm going to use this little piece as my ruler. And I'm just going to put this aside. And now I'm going to sew at the beginning where I've got that 45-degree line. And I'm going to position the starting point, or where that line is, of my binding, exactly where I want that finishing seam to be when I come back around after applying the rest of the binding to the edge of the placemat. So I've actually left about an 8-inch long tail there. I'm going to start at 8 inches from the beginning point of the binding, and it'll just in front of the first corner. And that, I feel, gives me enough room to manipulate the start and the ending points of the binding when I come back around and join the two pieces together. And when I get to within 3/8 of an inch of that bottom edge or the corner, I'm just going to make a little mark there. I don't do that now because I can eyeball it, but just for the sake of showing you in this video, I put that little line there because we're going to stop our sewing, turn, and we're going to sew at a 45-degree angle off that corner, just like that. We are really rocking the 45-degree angle with this placemat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a 45-degree angle fold in my binding, and I'm going to take it to the right side and then fold it back on itself. And I'm just going to make sure that that folded part under my right hand is right at the edge and flush with the edge to create that perfect fold for a perfect corner. And I can use a little clip to hold it in place. And in between those two outside edges of the binding is a folded piece right at the corner. It tucked nicely inside. I can't see any of that fold, so now you know you have it right if you can't see it either. And I can feel it underneath my finger, but I'm going to start now along the next side of my placemat and continue with a 3/8 of an inch wide seam or 1 centimeter wide seam, and just go up to the approach of the next corner and do it all over again. And once again, I will mark 3/8 of an inch up off the bottom so I know where to stop my straight line of sewing, make that 45-degree turn off the corner of my placemat. And if you have a way of doing these corners that works for you, by all means do it. This is just, I'm learning, and I find this is a really easy way to have really fantastic results. But I'm always interested in learning more, so if you have any recommendations, please leave them in the comments below. Joining the two finishing ends together is really the technique I'm going to be showing you with this application of the binding. But here's corner 2. And you can see that my 45-degree fold there underneath the lower and upper parts of the binding is perfectly hidden, which is exactly what we want to see. And now on to corner number 3. And once again, now I'm using the ruler just to show you that you can do that. This ruler too, I should tell you, this ruler is part of a set of 7. I'll leave the link below in the description. These are fantastic rulers, and you won't believe how reasonably priced they are. You get 7 rulers, maybe for the less than the price of one. It's a really good value. So I'm coming back down to the next corner, and I'll rinse and repeat, and now I'm back to the beginning. So there's the piece that I started with. So my joining seam is going to be about there on my finished placemat. And I'm going to do a joining seam that's just like how I started out when I joined the two pieces together. So first of all, I need to cut them to the right length. So I've overlapped them, and I'm going to use this piece that I cut off at the beginning as my measure about how big the overlap should be. So the overlap should be the width of whatever you decided to use for your edging. If you decided to use 3 inches, then you'd overlap 3 inches. It's easy just to keep a little piece of that grain edge to use as your ruler, like I'm doing. And I've just put a line on. I'm going to cut it straight across. And now I don't have to try to manipulate one of those edges to put on that 45-degree line. You can easily do that when you're doing something big like a quilt, but for a placemat, it's really hard. Just so much easier to do at the very beginning. Putting that 45-degree line on at the beginning really saves time, folks, and hassle. So I have flexibility here, so I can fold those two sides upwards to bring these two pieces together that I want to sew together. And I'm going to sew them together at right angles. So I'm going to match up the end edge with the top edge of one piece, having those pressing lines at right angles with each other and matching up those edges where I can perfectly. And so they are at a right angle, right sides together. So I'll use clips or pin to help hold those two pieces together at right angles. And that's going to make it very easy for me to sew them together, right sides together, following that line that I put on at the beginning before I added this edge to the placemat. And you can see how small that space is. It would be really hard to get in a ruler to really check for that 45-degree angle, but just following along, I've got a perfect fit. And I'm just checking to make sure that my fit is perfect before I trim off that excess fabric on the right side of my seam. If I had to, if I had made a mistake, then of course I could take it apart and correct it. But now that I've checked it, everything's good. I'm just going to open up that seam, finger pressing it flat as best I can. If you wanted to, you could take it over to the ironing board and press it. But finger pressing, just we want to sew it with the seam open underneath or inside once we finish closing off that edge. So I'm just going to pin across where that seam is or near that seam. And then I find, again, whatever's easier for your machine, I find just turning it over and closing up that seam works really well for me. And the edge is always nice and flat on the other side. And look at how pretty that diamond pattern looks on that other side too. And just checking to make sure my raw edges are all lining up. And there you have it. It's all ready to do the next step, which is pressing open all those sides of my placemat. Just pressing that edge flat. So it's coming off the end of my placemat, and it just makes it easier for me to turn it over and work on the other side. Now, you don't need to do anything with the corners because they will just go into place when you start doing this. And you can see how nice they are when you sew off the corner on that 45-degree angle. You have a nice finished corner on one side, and we're just going to tuck up the corners as we come to them, as we work our way around the placemat and sew down that edge on the other side. And I'll just make my seam allowance just slightly bigger as I close up this edging. And you can use clips to help you along the way if that helps, or pins. You can tack a pin into the corner out of your way just to hold that fold in place as you come up to it. So you want to replicate that 45-degree fold at the corner that you have on the other side, on this side as well. And once you come into that corner, you want to sew over it. You want to catch all those layers of fabric underneath. You can remove the pin and just pivot at the corner and sew on your way down to the next corner and repeat. I found it so easy to clip or pin those folded edges in place as I approached each corner until I got the hang of how to fold and tuck. So you make sure that you do the same if you need to use that help. And not to worry, after a few tries, you will be a pro at this and you'll love it too. And I really love that diamond pattern on that plain side. It's really pretty. Both sides are so pretty. This one's probably more fun than pretty. All right, there we go. That's it. And look at how nice and flat that lies. You can give it another pressing if you want to. But these are super. We're using them in our Airbnb. I've already washed them and they turned out fabulous. And here's the blue one that I made from that same jelly roll. that jelly roll that I bought had 60 pieces in it, so I figured I could make up to 20 placemats from that one package of jelly roll if I use something different for the edging like I have here. Or I can make 12 placemats if I use some of the jelly roll for my edging as well. So I'm so pleased with the way these turned out. And then, of course, I would do a matching one with those lines going in the opposite direction. And here's the one that I did where I cut the strips myself. So I cut my strips to 3 inches. So when they were sewn into position and I had used a 1/4 inch or the width of my presser foot, they were 2.5 inches apart. So my spacing of my decorative lines was 2.5 inches. And here they are on our Airbnb table. And don't they look fabulous? It's beginning to feel a lot like Christmas, but I'm going to make this pattern in the spring with some flowers and birds, and I'm just going to have fun. So questions or comments, please leave them below. I'll answer right away. And thank you so much to our video producers, our channel members for supporting the channel. We really appreciate you so much. And you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Threads and Blue Sky. We're Madcap Hats. You can like and subscribe. Like this video for sure. Subscribe to the channel for sure. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tori Capes. I'm a certified milliner, and I will see you again soon.